The Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: EliteForm.com, IgnitionAPG.com, PlayUSA at PLAEUSA.com, and Sorinex Exercise Equipment at Sorinex.com. And now, the Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast. Welcome to Iron Game Chalk Talk with your host, Ron McKeefery.
Every time our athletes walk into this weight room, they're going to be pushed to the max.
Let's go! Everything you got!
On this podcast, hear Coach McKeefery straight talk about training, featuring the top strength and conditioning professionals from around the world. And now, here's your host, Ron McKeefery.
Hey guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery, and this is episode number 142. Closing in on 150, and it's hard to believe that we've been going strong for over 140 episodes here, but truly appreciate you guys coming along the journey with me. It's been a fun project. No signs of slowing down at all, and just getting really excited each and every time to learn from some of the best around the world. And today is no different. We got Coach Ashley Jones with us. Coach Jones was honored as the Professional Strength and Conditioning Coach of the Year at this last NSCA conference. And so I got a chance to interact with him quite a bit during that. And just a fantastic guy that I've followed from afar for quite some time. He's the head strength coach for Edinburgh Rugby, also with the Scotland national team. And just has been a wealth of information through the years. And so I'm excited to have him on the show. We talk quite a bit about his journey. Obviously, we get into his philosophy a little bit, where he's more humanistic versus mechanistic. And we talk about the differences of both of those and why he's the way that he is. And, and really dive into kind of looking outside of your sport for inspiration, and he's done that for quite some time and had a storied career, and just tons of fantastic nuggets in this episode. Before we get started, though, I want to make sure we recognize our sponsor for this episode. We got Play USA, and they're putting out Rich Gray and Brett and the gang. They're putting out the Play Summits this year, and I get the honor of speaking at the Noblesville High School clinic in Indiana here in February coming up. So I'd encourage, if you're in that area, to come out to that conference. It's going to be a fantastic one. Fred Eads, who's been on the show, Mike Vorkapich, who's a fantastic strength coach, Lauren Landau, who's a great friend and has been on the show, Mark Uyama and Joe Connolly, all great strength coaches. And so I know that this is going to be a fun one. And then they got some other ones going on as well out in Denver and out in Woodstock, and just excited to see them get into this space and putting on clinics. And it's no surprise to me, as Play has done it repeatedly through the years as far as giving back to the strength and conditioning community. And so I would encourage you to support them both with these Play Summits. Fantastic to get the opportunity to go and learn and network and being at these types of events, but also if you are in the market for flooring, make sure you reach out. It's by far the best product. I'll just save you a lot of time that way, and reach out to them and have them give you a quote and take a look at your space. And like I said, they've been a wealth of information to me, not just from a flooring or installation standpoint, but just facility design in and of itself. So I'd encourage you to do that. Lastly, as many of you know, I've launched a new podcast called Ask Coach Mac. I did it in response to be able to respond to the number of emails that I get each day, each week, with lots of questions. And I love the questions. And I also, want to make sure that I continually give back to the community any way that I can. And thought this might be a unique, cool way to do that. And so I've launched it. A couple episodes out at this point, but what you need to do, if you have a question that you'd like me to answer and give you my take on it, go to askcoachmac.com, askcoach and then mac.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see a little box down here for a speak pipe widget. where you can hit and leave the start recording button and leave a voicemail right from your computer, as long as you have a microphone, and ask your question. And I ask that you just introduce yourself and leave a question that's less than a minute, and then I'll make sure to highlight your question and answer it on the show if you're chosen. And I feel like it's going to be something that the entire community can benefit from. So, encourage you to go there, ask Coach Max, scroll to the bottom of the page, leave your voicemail, and I'll make sure to include you on that show as well. In the meantime, go to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast, or you can check it out on the webpage there. And just great, 5 to 15 minute episodes answering the questions, training the issues. So it's just a good little nugget on your way in or out from work each day. So check that out. Leave a rating and review if you do. Let me know what you think. I'd love to hear that. And we'll see what we can do with this project as well. But want to get to Coach Jones. Sit back and enjoy, and we'll see you on the other side. All right, guys. Real excited to have Coach Ashley Jones with us. Coach Jones is a legend in this field. He's been doing it for an extremely long time and at the highest level for most of his career. And just a guy that I followed from afar. Got a chance to meet at the NSCA San Antonio conference where he was named the Pro Strength Coach of the Year. And so congratulations on that. And I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Ron. It's I don't know about legend, but I guess if you're around long enough, people sort of award you a few things, and it's nice to be a part of the show.
Absolutely. No. Well, hey, Coach, if you could kind of go into your journey a little bit, I'd like to, kind of take us down that path. What got you into strength and conditioning, and then the Reader's Digest version to get you there to Edinburgh.
Well, I think rugby was my sport of choice. My father took my brother and I to enroll in the local team, the DY Lions, back in Sydney, Australia, back when I was 8 and my brother was 7, and started playing rugby all along, and started training when I was about 14, 15, a little bit more seriously, and basically went to the gym and started doing a lot more running, and didn't have much skill, but I think I was a lot fitter and a lot stronger for my age than most of the other guys, and was fortunate enough to represent a couple of different teams along the way. And then shoulder injuries got the best of me, and I thought, well, the best way to stay involved in the sport that I love was to try and give back and be a part of it with the conditioning. And back in those days, the only course that you could actually do was a physical education teaching degree. Yep. And I'd had a great physical education teacher, Barry Carter, all the way through my high school years, and he was a great mentor in that role. And so I decided to be a teacher first and foremost. But during my education, I found the NSCA journals in our library, and I went to the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest, where I bought my first book on strength and conditioning, Stronger Shall Survive, by Bill Starr.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And that sort of swung me completely away from teaching and into coaching. And then everything from there has been a pretty great journey along to finding me now here in Edinburgh after almost 25 years of professional coaching now.
That's awesome. Well, I've actually been to Edinburgh. I've been to Edinburgh Castle there, and when I was in NFL Europe, and one of my favorite memories was we went to the castle, we were touring the castle, and afterwards we went down. I was with a couple of trainers and went down to a local pub there, and there was 2 rugby teams that just got finished playing, and they're doing the whole singing in the bar and the whole deal. It was awesome, and I had a good time. But Coach, you've had a storied career, and I watched an interview, or listened to an interview, I can't remember what it was, but where you talked about your philosophy, and your philosophy kind of being humanistic versus mechanistic. Can you explain that and kind of expand on that?
Well, I guess over the years, I think anyone's been around here long enough has sort of seen a shift towards the more scientific processes, the whole monitoring. GPS is obviously huge in rugby and starting to find its way into American professional sports as well. But I think in a lot of ways in that situation, there is an instance where you lose attachment to the person, to the individual player along the way. And I think it really brought home to me a comment from a colleague of mine back in Dublin, where they introduced GPS into Gaelic football for the first time, and the GPS analyst was sitting next to the coach on the bench, and the GPS analyst has said, well, you need to take number 42 off immediately. And the coach said, well, number 42, his name is Barry Fitzgerald.
That's right.
And he's more than a number, he's a person, and you should consider that. He said, well, and then the GPS analyst said, well, I don't really care what his name is, but he's only had 5 possessions in the last 17 minutes of play, and I think you need to substitute him. And the coach said to the GPS analyst, you know what he actually did in those 5 possessions? And they said, well, no, I'm just going by the numbers. So he said, well, he actually scored 3 goals in that period of time in those 5 possessions, and he's actually the reason why we're winning this football game currently. So you can sit back in the stands and leave the coaching and the human side of things to us coaches. So I think that's always been my sort of philosophy, in that we can get caught up with the loads, the intensities, the meterage, the days of the week training, things like that. But the best advice I ever had was basically, particularly since working in team sports, was to treat every individual like the person he is. And that really formed my aspect of the humanistic approach. And having heavily read through the Dalai Lama's work and elements such as that really it's humanism over mechanism every time. And you don't necessarily have all the greatest knowledge in the world, but if you can get that message across and to the players that you're trying to motivate and work with, then you've got a fair chance of actually being successful in the long run.
Absolutely. Is there an example in your career where maybe, because for me, I completely agree with what you're saying, and it's all about it's a relationship driven business. There's no doubt about it. Early in my career, my own ambition, my drive, my focus on the process, blurred that a little bit, and I tell the story on the show all the time about me throwing a plate at a kid for being 5 minutes late. Well, he was late because he found out his grandfather passed away, grandmother passed away, and so it really taught me a valuable lesson. Is there an example in your career where you maybe you were focusing more on the mechanistic part of things and changed it and really kind of that was that push to make sure that you're focusing on the athlete?
I think I was fairly fortunate because I had a really great learning curve in my first position back in 1992 when I was working in professional basketball in Sydney, Australia. And it was all about, I needed to put this in place, I needed to do this, I needed to do that, where it wasn't about me at all. And I think we had some really good American imports that come into our team in Sydney, and they basically learned through the basketball areas that the scrimmage is most important in basketball. And really the strength and conditioning side, I think, was secondary to the skill elements of that. But when I moved into rugby league, it was the physical component was a much higher component. But that's when I started thinking, well, what does the player really need to do versus what I know about training someone versus it's okay to get bigger and stronger and faster, but is this particular player really need to focus more on their conditioning? So from way back in probably 1994 when I moved into rugby league, it was more about what does the player actually need within the team environment to get the result that we all want, which is obviously a victory on the weekend. And I think that's framed everything I've done throughout my entire career, irrespective of the team I've been working with, the quality of the players I've been working with, is really attempting to have a sit-down chat every week with as many players as possible, or try and program over the course of a month that we get a 10 to 15-minute chat with each player so that we can actually frame the next month or 6 weeks of training with him as the focus of what he needs to do to achieve, and then obviously, and everyone gets better, then the team's going to have a much better chance of winning.
No, there's no question. I had a coach in my history, in my background, and he would always. I mean, he was a viper. Now he was a snake on the field in terms of, you made a mistake. He was going to let you know for sure. But he always called the player by his number on the field, and
all right.
But off the field, he always called him by his name. And the point was that, when they made mistakes, it wasn't the person making the mistake. It was the number making the mistake. The athlete making the mistake. And then off the field, you have to make, it has to be that personable side of things. You have to relate. I always thought that was great, just a great teaching cue. But, you've had, I think your career is, 30 plus years now, right?
25 is professional, and before that, just amateur work.
Yeah, when you're in this field the longer that I'm in this field, the more that I realize that I have to learn. If I look to outside professions or outside of my sport, is when I've picked up the most as a strength and conditioning coach. I've become a better coach that way. I've heard you say this as well, that you've found how you've lasted or how you've excelled is that you found inspiration outside of your sport, outside of your profession. What have been some of those revelations?
I think you're always looking to not necessarily reinvent yourself, but to add to the foundations that you've developed. I think once you've got your core philosophies in place, you're not going to falter too far from those particular elements. But there are obviously new ideas coming through all the time, and you tend to filter them with a little bit more professionalism as you get more experience. But I think if you're staying in your one sport all the time, then you're failing to get the true message of the other elements of training. For example, in our pre-season training, we use a lot of elements from different sports so that we can use European handball, particularly great for not only metabolic conditioning, but also eye-hand coordination and a different set of skills than the rugby players used to. A lot more basketball we use in pre-season as well. We get professional coaches in from those two sports to condition the team and also to teach them the skills. So they use their skill warm-ups as part of their warm-ups as well. Water polo, the martial arts, wrestling, boxing, all those elements of the conditioning that players don't realise they're working as hard as they are, whilst they're having fun and enjoying a different skill set. They're the key elements, I would say, is going outside your sport, volleyball, all the sort of the sports that can add value to your own sport without detracting from that area as well, because everyone's going to pick up some new skills. If it's playing Gaelic football, obviously with a round ball versus our oval ball in rugby, but it's the game itself, as most team sports games are, is all about manipulating opponents and finding space. Irrespective of whether you're playing basketball or American football or rugby, it's all about getting that person in space and then basically playing what you see. So rather than being too structured, and obviously these guys come from a rugby background, not from a football background, so they can actually learn how to manipulate people in the spatial aspects and then transfer across the game.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And that's, like I said, that's when I've learned the most and challenged myself. And that's when my athletes have learned the most and challenged themselves. So I agree with you 100%. You've dealt with professional athletes for quite some time. That evaluation process, when you bring them in the door and they're coming from, various backgrounds and they're coming at different stages in their athletic career, how have you gone about kind of evaluating where they're at? I mean, it's simple to say, yeah, we do a max bench or we do a one-arm squat or whatever, but that athlete that's on the tail end of their career, you don't want to be throwing that kind of weight on that kind of stress. And so, what are some of the diagnostics or some of the evaluation methods that you've used with your professional athletes?
Well, to tell you the truth, it's not that many. I mean, the reality of the situation is that a good sit-down chat with a person is going to tell you an honest appreciation of where they've come from, what they've done. Obviously, we can actually delve into their backgrounds by talking to their strength and conditioning coaches and people that have actually worked with them previously, and we'll often do that quite a bit if I don't know too much about the player. On the other flip side is the younger player who's basically coming in from our academy or is basically an 18, 19-year-old recruit. And I'm not very big on functional movement screening or elements like that. I think a keen eye can pick out a few problems when you start programming for squat or teaching them how to clean or to med ball or whatever you're actually programming for that particular person. But I think it's important to look at their history, look at where they come from, look at the programs they've been in before. The only thing we really do, particularly say coming in, would be a cardiovascular test, such as I've always used the 2.4K or 1.5 mile run test because I feel it's a really good aerobic test to get people started. We use the beat test in the past quite a lot as well, and we use the yo-yo as our primary test these days. But there's a test called the Mo Farah, which is who is one of Great Britain, England's greatest long-distance runners that it's actually used in rugby league in Australia and called the Bronco Run and things like that, which is a continuous 20, 40, 60-metre shuttle 5 times through. So you get an idea of where people are from a cardiovascular perspective in that one as well. So those sort of tests we like to use. Obviously, our sports are intermittent, high-intensity anaerobic game based on a fairly solid metabolic aerobic conditioning base.
Right.
So we really need that in place. And it is still an aerobic style of game. And the way we play the game, we like to be fairly expansive in our attack situations as well. So we need to have that underlying metabolic conditioning to be able to get the job done. So that's probably where we'd start, and then sort of develop things along the ways and start seeing whether they're metabolically challenged or neurally challenged or mechanically challenged as far as, strength is concerned. So, and we could probably individualize the program from them.
What about from those strength quality standpoint? Is there things that you're doing within the weight room to kind of to evaluate?
I think, particularly for the brand new guy, really is basically looking at movement patterns with the core lifts to begin with.
Sure.
And looking at, as we load a small amount of weight, that we can have the person see how they fare with that particular exercise, whether they change technique when the load gets slightly heavier. Similar to what we would do with the older athlete in looking at, so what's your injury history profile? Is there exercises that you can or cannot do, and why cannot do them? So we like to sort of, with our weight room, set up our various categories in a large spreadsheet on the wall, say upper body pushing, for example, and looking at vertical movements and horizontal movements, and then listing all the available exercises that we can do in our weight room with the equipment that we presently have. And from there, basically say, well, this is what I consider my top 5 exercises, which I found over the years to get us our best results as far as upper body pushing strength is concerned. So can you perform this? Have you done that? Let's go down through this list and start checking off and say, well, you can't do that because you've got that. You can't do that because this is a problem. Okay, let's try this. And then they try that and they think, oh, no, I feel a little bit tight through the shoulder or something like that. So, well, how about we do that with a football bar and see how that transfers across to you? And say, right, yeah, that feels good. Okay, right. Your next block, we're going to, and I usually work in 3-week blocks with the other 2 strength and conditioning staff that I have, 2 great guys, Mark Keys and Jack Walsh. Mark Keys usually does most of our strength program now, which has been a tough thing for me to let go as a strength and conditioning coordinator, because that's where I think my bread and butter has been over the years.
Right.
But he does a fantastic job, and we work in 3-week block cycles with more linear sort of progression over that 3-week block, and then we'll change the exercises and try and expose the athlete to a new stimulus rather than having them repeat the same exercise over and over and over again, particularly if it's been causing some sort of issues with them as well. So that's the way we'd approach that, really, as far as visual and looking at cues and looking at some of the fundamental, foundational type of movement patterns involved in those lifts.
Right. So when you've gone down that list and you found out, okay, this feels good, this doesn't feel good, and you've identified where the needs are for the athlete, the one thing that I always talk to my coaches about and just in general is that there's a certain level of requirement to play the game of football, whether or not you're an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, running back, kicker, whatever. You have to have a general level of fitness. You have to have a general level of strength, and those qualities, those principles to develop those qualities it doesn't change whether or not you're 6'8", 300 pounds, or you're 5'11", 160 pounds.
Yeah.
However, you do have to individualize to some degree for those needs. How have you from a practitioner standpoint? You have your team come in, you have the meat and potatoes that everybody has to do. And then how have you individualized that program and run that logistically within your organization?
I guess a lot of it comes back down to that conversation I have with every single player every month that we set that program for the next 4 to 6 weeks. In that, again, if you listen to what the player's telling you and can hear what he's not telling you at the same time, if you get my drift in that area, that there are certain exercises, certain things that he knows if he's been around for a period of time, he knows exactly what works for him.
Right.
In the past, I've probably discounted that player's individual intellectual property, if you like, about how his body responds to certain things. And obviously, two people are going to respond to the same program differently, irrespective of what goes on. So I've always used that sort of three areas of neural, metabolic, and mechanical as my go-tos as far as training protocols concerned. So that does the position first and foremost require more levels of speed, and what type of speed is it? Is it more agility, change of direction? Is it more top end speed? Is it more acceleration? Is it strength program? Is it more power based, or is the person lacking in strength versus lacking in power? So all those sort of questions, sort of asking the player and looking at some of the records, obviously over the period of time, and then saying, well, you feel from what we see you playing, it looks like you probably need to do a wee bit more cardiovascular conditioning at probably almost lactate threshold type work. So let's put a 10 or 15-minute block of that particular run training or off-feet conditioning with, say, the watt bike or the Concept 2 rower or various other equipment that we can put the player on. Let's put a little block of that twice a week over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and you come back to me and tell me how do you feel towards the back end of the week just before you play.
Right.
And obviously, week in, week out, and we have quite a few games over the course of the season in the professional rugby area in Europe. So how is what we're doing in the week impacting and transferring to your performance on game day? And if we're doing something in the week that's not aimed at improving performance on the weekend,
right,
then why the hell are we doing it in the first place?
No doubt.
If it's all about transfer and getting people better to play the game. I love what Joe Ken keeps saying about we're building football players, we're not building second-rate weightlifters or powerlifters or whatever. We want to make better football players. We're not doing strength and conditioning to make second-rate Olympic lifters or powerlifters. So the transfer is everything, and I guess that's one of the big holy grails, as far as I'm concerned, in team sports, is the individualization and transfer of training to allow us to win football games.
No question. Well, ultimately, yeah, that's the ultimate evaluation, isn't it? Is game day and wins and losses and.
Well, line, I don't think we ever get fired from our positions because someone hasn't squatted 240 kilos. We get fired from positions because our team went 6 and 8 or something like that to which is all about outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been, like I said, you've been in this business for 25 years or so. What's some advice you have, or what's some what do you see as real positives within the profession right now, and what do you see as some things that we need to improve upon?
I think we are tending to grasp technology and letting go of coaching. In my belief, in that it's obviously wonderful that we've got all these metrics coming in from various GPS and tailoring programming based around daily monitoring and things like that, but we tend to gather a lot of information and we don't actually know how to use a lot of that information yet in some sports. So I guess it's particularly, for example, we've only been using GPS in our program here in Edinburgh for the last 12 months. So we have a large amount of data that we're starting to mine into and starting to try and ask the questions of the data that what do we need to do to get that result on the weekend, rather than just gather information about people and not use it. I think we really need to match it up with a keen eye and to sort of look at saying reasons, well, this is what the data's telling us, but what's the player telling us? And don't lose track of that personal contact with the player to make decisions, to include the player in those decisions as well, rather than just going completely on the data. I think the really great things, obviously, is players are far more accepting of strength and conditioning and the value of strength and conditioning in the modern era than they may well have been, and are very well educated in that area as well. I think a lot of players are coming out of high school and college, and I know in our own program we have probably 3 or 4 of our older players that have started doing UK SCA courses and are starting to look at potentially moving into strength and conditioning as a post-playing career move, which I think is really valuable to use those guys to educate the younger players within the squad as well, and looking at the longevity of these players and saying, well, one of the big reasons these guys are still playing after 14, 15 years of professional rugby is the fact that they have been really, really diligent in all elements of their strength and conditioning, not just the gym, but looking at what they need to do as far as preparing to lift and what they need to do post-lifting as far as restoration, regeneration activity is concerned as well.
No, I agree. I always tell, people ask me, because I've gone back and forth between professional and collegiate, and even at a collegiate level now, you're dealing with a more informed consumer. I mean, with the internet and with all the resources that are out there now, you're dealing with athletes that know they understand the body a little bit better, they understand training a little bit better, they have their own kind of ideas of what's right and wrong, and so that presents its own set of challenges, but it's also positive as a whole. I think. What would you say? I mean, obviously you mentioned technology, but from a profession standpoint, what do you think some of the negative things that young strength coaches they need to be aware of when they're getting into this field?
Well, a colleague of mine in Sydney wants me to sort of speak to his graduating class, and I guess the expectations, that's what he wants me to talk to them about, is that a lot of these young people coming out of either an undergraduate degree or even a master's degree are expecting to go straight into my job. And I think that's probably, some of them may well obviously get there, but it's a long road. I mean, looking at, particularly from the coaches conference anyway, recently, and looking at some of the jobs that people have to do to get into the profession in the first place. I mean, interning for no salary for 12 months to 2 years seems to be absolutely massive. I was fortunate when I got into the ground level of the profession. Even back in those days, I think I got paid $5,000 for my first year.
Right.
So the salary has moved steadily up over the years and changing positions, but it's not the Scott Cochran salaries that you read about in newspapers or things like that. There's a few and far between, and sometimes you have to have a battle between opposing colleges in the one conference or opposing sports to get that sort of elevation occurring. But it's a hard road. There's long hours. I mean, we'd regularly put in 12-plus hour days, up to 16-hour days in pre-season to make sure the job's done. And I don't think it's as glamorous. I think a lot of people see game day. And obviously game day is a massive reward for everyone involved in the sport, because obviously that's where you get to see the people you work with throughout the week basically show what they can do.
Right.
And but people don't look at those other areas where you might be collecting urine samples earlier in the week to look at hydration status, or to help mix up protein shakes and other bits and pieces, and to clean up after people. And they're the sort of tasks that basically, if you don't do it, someone else won't. So you've got to basically do it yourself. The conditioning coach sees the reaction on game day, and I think they see the game day is what the job's all about, but they actually don't realise that you're putting in 12 to 16-hour days throughout the course of the week before that game.
Right.
And sometimes you have to collect urine from players and do a urinalysis as far as hydration status is concerned. Some days you're mixing protein shakes. Some days you're basically cleaning up after the players and other bits and pieces. But you basically got to do everything that you possibly can to ensure that the players can perform to the best of their ability come game day.
Agreed. What would you say? We kind of end the show with some resources here. What would you say is the best piece of coaching advice you ever received?
I think we alluded to it earlier. It was basically treat the individual as the person he is, rather than look at the team as without looking at that individual person. So I think I did probably have learned that more and more as I've gone through, and I think probably that's the important thing. And the other thing is, when you're looking at people, selection of character first and foremost, and that's looking for me as far as employing someone to join my staff, or working with the coaching staff to say, well, we've got two players that are very, very, one's quite skillful, but of quite a poor character. The other one's less skillful, but has got wonderful character. Well, that's a lay down misère. That's you go with character first and foremost, because you can always teach skills, you can't teach character in a lot of situations. So I think that's the most important point.
Absolutely. Give us a book, app, and website recommendation.
Well, I'll have to fail on the app because I'm a dinosaur, and I don't think I have one app to my name as far as anything strength and conditioning. I've never been able to find, having read some of them, never been able to find one that actually has everything I really want, and I don't want to have 15 of them to look at it. But I say book-wise, let me see. God, there's so many. I guess The Strongest Shall Survive was the first one I picked up at the 1980 Olympia, and I've had that on my desk ever since. Super Training, obviously by Sifan Verkhoshansky, should be a Bible reading. The Essentials text through the NSCA CSCS program is exceptionally important form of reference. Milo magazine, Iron Mind website, Milo magazine has always been pretty good. Anything by Zatsky, Orsky, Greg Cook, Mike Boyle, Mike Robertson, Dan John. I think Dan John, really, I guess he's similar age to me. He's a few years younger than me, so I read his books, and he looks at not just the physical, but he looks at the mental and the spiritual aspect of who we are as people and what we do as far as the job's concerned. And he's obviously going to be called fairly old school by the way he puts things together, but old school's good. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater when something new comes in, and his philosophies and statements are very strong, and he writes the way you're too young to remember, but the old Iron Man, when Peary and Mabel Rader ran the organisation out of their house in Alliance, Nebraska in the mid-'70s and towards the late 70s, early 80s, when Iron Man used to be weightlifting, strongman, powerlifting, bodybuilding, nutrition. That was the stuff I grew up with, and I'd be waiting at the newsagent's door come 25th of the month or whenever it was to be the first one to pick up the latest edition and to trial out the new training programs that come in there as a 15, 16-year-old with no knowledge other than what the Iron Man used to tell me, and I think a lot of people maybe now have missed out that opportunity to experiment more on themselves. And I guess giving advice, as you said earlier, about the young strength coaches, is that I would trial everything on myself. Even now at slightly older than the average strength and conditioning coach floating around, I still attempt to do everything I possibly am going to program into the players for the next block. And if I can't do it, or how are they going to be expected to do it, or whatever situation that arises. So to get the feel of exercises, to know the variations. I mean, one of the biggest things I've found hard to fathom is we have some people trying to get into our profession that actually don't train.
Right.
That's okay if you want to be a sports scientist. You want to be an analyst. That's great. Let's go off in that direction. But if you want to coach, and it's experiential, it's people first and foremost. So if you're not prepared to, as Dave Tate says, spend time under the bar, then how do you expect to coach it in the first place? And I think that's a huge thing.
No question. Well, you obviously have contributed to that body of work as well, and so I really appreciate all that you do for the profession and the resources that you've put out and the way that you've gone about your business, Coach. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's being able to put my ideas into words currently for Elite FTS and previously for GetStrength.com. I mean, it's been really, really wonderful. And I think, to me, one of the most exciting things is when, like at the Coaches Conference, which was my first time at the Coaches Conference this January just gone, was that you get people you've never met before who actually come up to you and say, "Oh, thanks very much for that article you wrote on such and such, because it really opened my eyes to another aspect of of training that I'd never actually thought about. And it's wonderful because we used to, like me growing up, we used to always look to the United States with, I guess when Boyd Epley started the strength coaching profession and the NSCA, and then you feel that everything's coming one way. And now it's when you look at the NSCA being even awarding me this great honour just recently, that it's not an inward-looking organisation anymore. It's not an inward-looking profession anymore. It's looking outside the country, looking outside the sport, and I would love to work in the United States. It may be past the time now, but the way that rugby's going in the United States now is an opportunity for me, or even at college and professional NFL level, that would be just the icing on the cake, dream come true for someone who started as a 17-year-old back in 1978 wanting to be a coach, and have now come to this position where I am now, looking towards the United States and now hoping to contribute something to young coaches coming through is just all I need.
No, it's fantastic, Coach. And the world is shrinking, that's for sure. And opportunities like this to talk with great people is continuing to help do that. So thanks so much, Coach. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Ron. Much appreciated.
That's it for this episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk. Thanks to this week's guest as well as our sponsors for bringing this episode to you for free. Make sure to check out ronmckeefery.com, where you can join our mailing list, find the show notes, including all the links and resources mentioned, and information about Coach McKeefery's other products. While you are there, please join Coach McKeefery in the comments section thanking our guest for sharing. If you haven't subscribed to Iron Game Chalk Talk on YouTube or iTunes yet, make sure to do so. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome. Coach McKeefery can be found on Twitter at @RMcKeefery, on Facebook and YouTube at /Ron.McKeefery. That's it for this week. Be sure to check back next week for another great episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk.